Hello everyone and welcome along to the second edition of a brand new Doctor Who podcast, KerVAM, where of course we here love to talk about Doctor Who Blu-rays, DVDs, the special features, because, you know, there's 100 podcasts out there where you can listen to a review of, I don't know, Invasion of the Dinosaurs or, I don't know, Earthshock or something. But have you ever heard about, you know, people talking about the special features, the documentaries about Earthshock or Invasion of the Dinosaurs? Somehow I think you probably haven't. So that's kind of the gap in the market that we're trying to fill in. And I hope you guys, if you haven't already, please do check out our first episodes from 3 weeks ago, where we talked all about the Season 8 Blu-ray that was first released a few weeks ago, along with a little discussion about cover art and how some of them are, you know, there's a fair mixture, some rather better or worse than others in terms of cover art for the various releases. So yeah, today I'm going to be talking again with Ryan and Charlie. So hello guys, how are you getting on?
I'm doing good, thank you. How about you, Charlie?
Yeah, I'm doing fine. I've been watching lots of Doctor Who stories in VAM, and they're like
brilliant. Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's your latest release that you've been getting stuck into, guys? Charlie, you first. What have you been up to? What have you been watching?
Well, since I haven't really been able to get the Season 8 box set, I've been watching the Season 8 stories on DVD. So I've actually recently finished it. I've got the Demons, and
oh yes, yep.
I finished
Very
that last
good
night.
choice.
It was really good, yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the stronger stories of the Purple Era. I think for me, it's certainly a favourite. What about you, Ryan? What have you been watching?
Well, first off, I have to say, Charlie, that's a great choice because the Demons is my personal favourite of the Purple Era. So really good choice there. In terms of what I've been watching recently, I've actually been kind of related to the topic we have going on today. I've been recently going over Power of the Daleks again, looking at the both versions of it, and just to do a little comparison. And it is quite alarming, some of the differences between them and just how the new version sort of holds up.
Yes, exactly. No, there's certainly some noticeable differences between the two animations, which is always quite interesting to go in and observe and look at. And that's certainly something we're going to cover today, because of course, as you mentioned, Ryan, today I want to call it a little sort of animation special, because Doctor Who is probably quite unique in the fact that, well, firstly, there are episodes of Doctor Who that no longer exist because the BBC used to go and wipe them back in the 60s when they thought that physical media was never going to become a thing, and yet here we are 50 years later talking all about it. But they did that, and it meant that about 15 years or so ago, and we'll get into more detail on this, the BBC came up with the novel idea of thinking, why don't we animate these episodes that don't exist? We've got the soundtracks, we've got most of the episodes, why don't we animate the ones that are missing? And that's created a fascinating new aspect of Doctor Who and the classic Doctor Who sort of DVD and Blu-ray range, in that sense of being able to sort of reproduce and release versions of these stories that we'd long thought lost and never thought we'd get any sort of visual representation of again, really. So yeah, today we're going to just sort of work our way through, look at the history of animated Doctor Who, how it all started with the missing episodes back in 2006, when the Invasion was first released, all the way up to the present day, where we've got the Web of Fear confirmed, and various other ones in the pipeline, rumoured to be coming up very, very soon as well. So yeah, we're gonna start off. Well, guys, firstly, what is your kind of initial impression of animated Doctor Who? Is it something you enjoy sitting and watching, or do you find it kind of takes you out of the stories a little bit, particularly when there's animations of sort of episodes within existing episodes? How do you guys kind of see it?
Yeah, in general, I think animating the missing stories is a brilliant idea. I think it's good to obviously find the episodes like the 2013 releases, but
yeah,
you know, that's never going to happen. We're never going to find all of them, like say Marco Polo. So it's best, I think, if we just animate them. In terms of when they're mixed with actual episodes, I think it does take me out the story a little bit. So say, for example, the Faceless ones, if I were to watch the Faceless ones, I wouldn't watch episodes 1 and 3 in their original forms and then the rest in animated. So I'd watch it all animated.
No, exactly. Yeah, it can be a bit odd, particularly cutting between these sort of, when you've got 4 episodes of animation and then just an episode or 2 that exists. It can be a bit sort of jarring, I think, sometimes. What about you, Ryan? What are your sort of initial thoughts on animated Doctor Who?
I 100% agree with Charlie. I think it's a really good way of sort of filling the gaps and sort of complete the story that people have been wanting to see for a long time. And for me, it only sort of becomes a bit jarring depending on the quality of the animation. So, like, if it's not a very good animation, it does sort of take me out of it. But if it's a really good animation, I'm just really invested in it. And yeah, I just think it's a much better way of doing it. frankly.
Yeah, no, exactly. I certainly agree with you there. So yeah, the history of animated Doctor Who. I don't want to get this too, a boring reading a Wikipedia page vibes. We're not doing that. But animated Doctor Who, of course, as many of you, I'm sure, listening will know, started in 2006 with The Invasion, which also in turn came off the back of the animated adventure featuring Richard E. Grant as the Doctor, Scream and the Shalka, which was it Scream of the Shalka? Was it Scream of the Shalka? I can't remember the name. I'm not actually sure if I've ever watched it before. Have either of you actually seen it?
I've only seen it once. It was a very long time ago, and it was fine. It was decent.
Yeah.
But not something that overly memorable. But yeah, based on my memory from who knows about 8 years ago, I remember it being just watchable.
Yeah, Charlie, have you ever seen it?
I have actually. I watched it a year or two ago. I think I haven't got the DVD. I watched it somewhere else, but I think it was good, but it didn't feel like Doctor Who as such.
Right.
It's like Series 11 of New Who. It, other than that Richard E. Grant was playing the Doctor, it didn't feel like Doctor Who as such. It's not routine Doctor Who, and yeah, it was a bit odd, but I still quite liked it. It was quite fun.
I think sort of the thing with Scream and the Shalka, and maybe sort of why it isn't quite as polished, is because I think they were experimenting with like different technology. The fact that they were using very old PCs at the time, working on different frames per second of animation, and the fact that they brought in Richard E. Grant, who they didn't have the right equipment to get the right performance, and I think it was 2003 was a very different time compared to right now how they do it in 2020.
Yeah, 100% animation sort of technology and the ability to be able to produce this sort of stuff has changed hugely. And I think in many ways, Scream of the Shalka kind of fell at a very awkward point because they kind of announced it. And then pretty sure before it ever actually got released, Doctor Who was announced that it was returning and coming back. And like they'd marketed all this as Richard E. Grant is the Ninth Doctor. This is the new Doctor for the new age in animated form. And then suddenly that all had to be kind of backtracked on before it even was really released because suddenly Christopher Eccleston's here. Russell T Davies is going, Christopher Eccleston is the Ninth Doctor. Richard D. Grant's now just an alternative kind of non-canon Doctor, essentially. And so I think that really put it on the back foot straight off because I guess maybe their initial idea was if it went successfully and there wasn't TV Doctor Who, then they would have continued to produce these animated sort of stories, and that would have been the way forward alongside Big Finish's audio dramas in the way of keeping the brand alive. But then, that really wasn't needed once we got the main show back again. But yeah, it was sort of off the back of that really that presented the opportunity to explore animating some classic Doctor Who for the very first time, where they saw that there was this opportunity with existing soundtracks, particularly stories with existing episodes, where they could plug the gaps and create a very sort of interesting DVD release. Because I think they sort of felt, certainly around that time, that releasing a story with, I don't know, like the Crusade or something with 2 episodes of, or in the Underwater Menace with 2 episodes existing in 2 episodes where they just had a photo recon, the old stuff that Loose Cannon used to do. I think that they felt that wasn't really going to be appealing to an audience, and so they felt they needed to create a kind of moving picture solution. And that was the opportunity to kind of explore the animation aspect. And I believe at the time with this particular first release for The Invasion, they were sort of teaming up the BBC and they were looking at ways of creating kind of new interactive media ideas and projects and stuff they could work on, basically just a way to find some money to be able to spend on it. And having had the connection with the animation company called Cosgrove Hall, who produced Scream and the Shalka, that was sort of the way that sort of linked the way into being able to create an animation for The Invasion. And so that all came together right around 2005, 2006 time, I think. They were sort of all working hard on that, alongside obviously the start of New Who back then as well. It was sort of a very exciting time to be a fan. Suddenly you're going from nothing to new Doctor Who, plus these stories we thought were lost forever. We're now getting a visual representation of them in the animated form as well. Even if it had its challenges, I think, in the sort of production of that, and obviously it had never been done before, so it was always going to be a challenging opportunity. And I think, have either of you seen the Invasion animation before? It's probably a good question.
Yes, I have. It was actually one of the very first Doctor Who's I've ever watched back when I first started. After I watched my very first ones, which were Ark in Space and Genesis of the Daleks, The Invasion was the next one I watched afterwards, and it was definitely a big one to jump into, given the fact that I was at the same time I was learning about the topic of missing episodes and how the BBC sort of junked them from the archives, and so it was very interesting to see how parts 1 and 4 were going to look in the animated form. And I will say, for a first effort, the first sort of stab at it, I thought they did a fairly good job. I definitely appreciated the art style they were going for. Definitely.
I hate to say this, but I haven't actually seen The Invasion yet, which really annoys me because I'm such a huge fan of Troughton, and I feel like it's a story I'm going to really enjoy, seeing as how much I like the Cybermen as villains. I'm hoping to get it sometime soon, and I have had a look at some pictures online, and I do quite like the art style. I think it looks different to the others, like Macro Terror and Fury from the Deep, but it looks like distinctive and different. It'll probably be quite memorable when I do watch it.
Yeah, definitely. I think this, in many ways, this animation is unique because as we'll come on to explore, we didn't get another animation after this until 2013. So it was very much at the time seemed to be a one-off that was done because there was a bit of funding available to put aside to do it for this sort of launching a new sort of project within the BBC. But ultimately, it wasn't going to be financially viable in the long run to do other releases. It just simply, like, the DVD sales figures were good, but they weren't kind of enough to justify the cost that at the time was so huge to be able to even animate 1 or 2 episodes of a classic serial. Because I think personally, I agree with Ryan that the actual animation itself is brilliant. It's cracking. It's one of the best ones I think they've ever done. I think that probably to an extent that's because they had more money available to be able to do it and do it to a better degree. But it's also noticeable and interesting. I was reading up on this animation that actually they initially kind of finished it in autumn 2005, and kind of the sort of production team who were in charge of the DVD release kind of looked at it and weren't actually completely happy with it. It felt a little bit at points it was too much kind of going away from what Doctor Who would have looked like back in the 60s in terms of the sort of direction and just the ability to create shots and things. There's a lot that you could not do then, that like cameras couldn't do that. The way it was set up wasn't possible. And so they actually sent it back to Cosgrove Hall, who were sort of recommissioned to make a few more changes to it in 2006 before the release later that year, because it just wasn't quite what they wanted and quite what they thought the fans would enjoy by having too many differences to what there was sort of in the in available to them in the 60s, which I think is quite interesting. It's something we'll explore in other releases later in this video, in this podcast, where for whatever reason, animation team really thought it was not necessary to try and follow what the 60s did, and I don't think it really worked. But yeah, so that was The Invasion, and I think I'm probably biased because I like the story itself so much. I think it's just a brilliant. I mean, it's a long old one. It's an 8-parter, but I think it's absolutely brilliant, and I think the animation actually plugs the gaps really, really well in the story. It's notable that actually the episodes that are missing, animated ones, don't really feature the Cybermen at all, even though the Cybermen are a big part of the story. It's quite noticeable that it was much more about sort of animating the characters like Tobias Vaughan's character and obviously the Doctor and companions. And I just love the scenes in episode 1 where we get they're sort of exploring the International Electromatics Factory. We get all these very mysterious sort of shots of them kind of, in the dodgy van, and then somebody going and gets shot, I think, and out in the back there, and then sort of it's trying to it's sort of find their way into this massive sort of corporation building. I think sort of the music along with the black and white animation just really kind of plays to the strengths of the animated format, I think, in this particular episode. And I think that's the nature of it with a lot of these animated stories. Some of them just lend themselves to animation better than others do, and I think that's again something we'll explore through these various animations, and something that just can be very noticeable, in some working better than others, really, I think. So yeah, Ryan, did you have any more thoughts on the Invasion sort of animation style and the kind of success of it?
Well, in terms of the success of it, I think it was popular time. I think people really thought it was a good way of sort of plugging the gaps, and I think the animation team were planning on doing Power of the Daleks next to be a bit more ambitious, but for some reason they just never got around to it, and ended up with the animators ended up doing the Infinite Quest instead.
Yes, yeah, I think it probably was just them looking at this kind of aspect that New Who animation was probably more marketable and more likely to produce more money out of it, because as much as Doctor Who was really booming at that time, and Classic Who as well was having a strong sort of interest, I do think that, let's be real, slapping David Tennant on animation is going to get more viewing figures than slapping a missing episode being animated. As much as we love Classic Who and love these missing episodes animations, it can't be denied that David Tennant's going to pull in more viewing figures, more money, more publicity from it. And so I think that's probably why they decided to go down that route at that point in time. And I mean, we might as well, as it kind of fits into the timeline here, we might as well give a quick mention to the Infinite Quest and Dreamland, the 2 David Tennant animations from the late 2000s, which I wouldn't say are massively fondly remembered. Would you guys agree? I don't think they're really the most great things in the world.
I remember watching Infinite Quest at the time. I remember watching that one in chunks because I remember they did each little part on the show Totally Doctor Who.
Oh yes, I remember Totally Doctor Who. Oh, what a classic!
Yeah, I ashamedly I did watch that because, well, with me being a bit of a kid, being about 10, 11 when that started, I did remember watching it. Just eager to see what was going to happen in the Infinite Quest, or what was going to happen, following each cliffhanger. But I have to say, watching it all together, it does feel very rushed. The story, it just feels like a 2-3 parter slapdashed, put together as one singular story. And as a story, I don't think it really flows naturally when you put it all together, as opposed to releasing it separately in little individual chunks.
Yeah, I think it probably was the case that certainly, the Infinite Quest, you say, was designed in that sort of 5-minute or so mini releases each week with Totally Doctor Who, which I think then, and also you can look at the same thing to an extent with classic Doctor Who that was intended to be released weekly, and sometimes watching it all together can feel a bit, it doesn't quite work in the same way as watching it in that sort of classic way. So yeah, I think that the Infinite Quest maybe wasn't the most successful. What about you, Charlie? Have you ever managed to catch either of these and discover them?
I've actually I've watched them both. I watched them both a few months ago because I just heard about them. I was quite curious. Dreamland, I've got to say, I wasn't really a fan of. I think it was again a bit rushed and just a bit of a weird story, I think. As for Infinite Quest, I've got to say it's kind of a guilty pleasure of mine. I do understand all of its flaws and everything, but I don't know. I just think it's a bit fun, a bit of an underrated gem.
Yeah, no, that I have to be honest. I don't know when I last watched either of these. Like, it could have been 10 years ago that I watched these, so I genuinely can't really remember the plot of either of them. I remember them being like okay, but maybe that's because I was a child at the time and was more easily pleased as an 11-year-old with an animated David Tennant than I am now. And looking at them now, and just knowing obviously fans' perception of them is I think quite poor, certainly compared to the success of the classic Who animated range there, really. So yeah, maybe it's not something that's the most fondly remembered in Doctor Who history, but they I guess they never decided to do any more of them after those two. I have to say I don't know why that was. Maybe they just didn't see it as being that successful or that popular. And then obviously the show kind of changed eras into Matt Smith and things, and maybe Stephen Moffat just wasn't really interested in doing that kind of stuff anymore, and didn't feel that was a route he wanted to kind of explore. Because I'm sure Russell would have had some involvement in the production of those animations at the time as well, and certainly been a driving force behind that. So you'd assume that was probably the reason why it all went that way. But of course, we as I mentioned earlier, we saw basically 7-year hiatus in terms of classic Q animation, where we got that singular one in 06 with the invasion, and then it all went a bit quiet. Nothing really happened. It wasn't cost effective, and they just kind of left it there. But then suddenly I think it was either 2011 or early 2012, they announced that for the big 50th anniversary year in 2013, that they'd be, at least firstly, they announced they'd be releasing The Reign of Terror, which is a story that, well, it has 4 episodes existing, 2 episodes missing, and I think is a story that maybe would not have been at people's, top of people's lists for animated stories being sort of created, when like you'd had none for 7 years, and it's like, wow, an animation's coming. Oh wait, it's The Reign of Terror. Not to say I think it's a terrible story, just that I don't think it's one that many people would jump to and go, wow, I want that. But we got it. It was done by Planet 55, which sort of became Big Finish Creative, and the sort of studio, the animation studio that's now run by Big Finish, their sort of animation arm, as it were, which also did Fury from the Deep many, many years later. But yeah, this is probably the most, I think, the least popular and least liked animation on the whole by fans. I don't know, have either of you guys ever seen the Reign of Terror animation?
Yeah, I've seen The Reign of Terror. I think the animation style is, I can't say it's amazing. I think it's like they turned the contrast up so much, so all the shadows were just completely black and everything else was just completely white, and it just looked really strange. As for the story, like I said before, it does make it quite jarring having a mix between regular and animated. Yeah, and I agree with you, Elliot. I think it was a bit strange that they chose to do that. So, I think it would have made more sense to do Wheel in Space or The Moon Base or, The Power of the Daleks.
Yeah, exactly. I think given that at the time there were still quite a few stories with only 2 episodes missing, and that seemed to be kind of the idea there for obviously 3 or 4 of the 5 that we got in the sort of first batch of animations. They were all 2 episodes were missing, plus the 10th Planet had the singular episode missing. And yeah, I think The Reign of Terror also suffers from, as I sort of referenced earlier, this bizarre direction choice to go for these slightly ridiculous cuts, close ups, sort of this shot of people's eyes. Like I skip through it because the episode you can view them online if you just type the episode in. They turn up on the internet pretty easily. And if you just skip through it, like I did quite quickly, like virtually every shot is like a close up of their face, which you quite frankly rarely got in classic Who. Like they're all massive wide shots because of the cameras and the way they shot things. And the idea of cutting within a 2-second, like a singular line, having 3 different shots is just nonsensical. And so I think it, particularly with a sort of thing like this, where it's part of a bigger story where 4 episodes are existing. There's episodes 4 and 5 that are missing from the archive. I think it's 4 and 5. Is it 4 and 5? I think so. I'm pretty sure it is. Yeah. With those 2 being the only ones missing, and then being obviously having at either end, you've got the existing episodes. It's so jarring going from normal classic Doctor Who to suddenly this, what we're directing a Hollywood film style in animation form or anime or something. I don't know. It's just a bizarre creative choice, which they obviously didn't replicate ever again in terms of this sort of animation style and design. They realized that really didn't work. As you mentioned as well, Charlie, the contrasts are also a slightly bizarre choice in creating these massive shadows and just darkness behind every character and things. I really think it's probably the weakest of the animations. I'm not going to say I hate it and I'm still happy they did it. It's better than nothing. I prefer that to watching a photo reconstruction, but I can't say that it's one that I think was a particular success in itself, and I think it's not helped by the story just being not a very memorable one. It's a historical, which is it's the only historical they've ever animated. Maybe they thought the sort of the people buying it is just going to be less popular, and maybe that showed in that animation. I don't know. I can't see it being a massive seller and really popular particularly, but yeah, that was the decision they made with that one. Ryan, have you ever had a chance to give it a watch?
Yeah, I have watched it, and I have to say I'm quite a sucker for the whole pseudo historicals of classic Who, and of course the Hartnell period had a lot of those type of stories, and I do really like the Reign of Terror, but I do have to agree, I did find the animation to be very, very jarring, and I will agree it's probably my least favorite of the animations. And then notice on some of the close-ups, whenever characters are turning their heads or moving around, they tried to do this sort of combination of 2D and 3D, and I'm not really sure it worked that well. And you're right, the edit, I've noticed there was a lot of quick cuts between close-ups, and it just took me out of it. I was just like, I was like, it needs to focus on one shot. If they keep it focused, it makes it more impactful. But the fact they just do all quick edits just took me out of the story.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you there. So probably one of the least successful animations, unfortunately, in the Reign of Terror. But 2013 was a bumper year. Well, the 12 months from January 2013 to January 2014 was a bumper time for Doctor Who fans in terms of classic Who, because we also got animated The Ice Warriors, The 10th Planet, and The Moon Base, all those 4 stories within the space of 12 months after having had nothing for 7 years. It was, I think, probably quite a surprise for fans at the time. But also gives us a great opportunity to explore lots of different animations here, because it's fascinating. The next story that was done was The Ice Warriors, which was released in August of that year, done by Curios Animated, which I don't think really exists anymore. They're kind of a company that went bust or something. Certainly Cosgrove Hall, I know, who did The Invasion, they're gone. And I think Curious Animated have also gone. But they were kind of the sort of the animation on that was led by Chris Chapman, who I'm sure many people listening will know is one of the main producers of features for the Blu-ray range currently. And is fantastic with all of that. And there's a great documentary actually on the Ice Warriors DVD about with him talking about the animation for it. And what's fascinating about the Ice Warriors is it goes in the complete opposite direction of the Reign of Terror, because Chris was specific about wanting to basically make the animation absolutely shot by shot accurate to what the original episode would look like. They got the camera scripts out, they looked at all the telesnaps that are existing and things, and wanted to try and match every single shot, no matter how kind of not working for animation it would be, whether it's a flipping 20-second long shot that does that with a bit of movement but not much in it. He wanted it to be perfectly accurate to what was originally done and designed. And I think that probably created a bit more simplicity in some of the animation there. But it's just a fascinatingly different approach to the animation for this story. So I don't know, what did you guys think of this animation if you've seen it?
I thought the animation itself was fine. I don't think it's one of the best animations. I think if I was to rank the animations, it would be sort of on the lower end. I do like the design work. I just think some of the character movements just seemed to look very stiff and awkward in some places. I just think that was like the only thing that was sort of letting it down. But on the whole, I thought it was perfectly fine.
Yeah. What about you, Charlie? Have you ever had a chance to check it out?
I haven't actually seen the story. I'm hoping to at some point because
Yeah.
it's Patrick Troughton. I love that
Yes.
era so much. Looking at pictures now, the style does look very different to the Reign of Terror.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, and obviously I'm not looking at any clips, so I can't see how well the characters move.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
yeah, this strikes me as the kind of thing that would have not great animation as such.
Yeah, no, I think what's fascinating about the animated range is that for an audience, there's so many different kind of perspectives and attitudes, and like for some fans, the idea of a shot for shot recreation animated style is like perfection. It's exactly what they want. Like, it's the best thing ever. For other fans, they might want something that's a little bit more kind of stylistic and more kind of almost like an entertaining watch in a sense. Because not that the Ice Warriors animation isn't entertaining, but it is because it's designed to be like the classic show, but it's animated. It's naturally just going to be a not as good version as the existing episodes. It's episodes 2 and 3 that are missing from the Ice Warriors, and so you start out with your existing episode, and then we're plunged into 2 episodes of animations. And I don't know if it's just me, but I don't know if you guys ever find when you're watching these stories with missing episodes in the middle that are animated, you're kind of enjoying it to an extent during the animated ones, but you're also kind of just waiting to get to the existing episodes again. And kind of that just feeling of like, this is good, but I'm looking forward to when I get back to an existing episode just because it's a more enjoyable watch. I don't know if you guys ever find that.
I did find that during this particular period of the animations, from Reign of Terror to the 10th Planet to the Moon Base, I did find that during this period, because these 4 animations are probably my least favorite of the bunch. It has to be said.
Yeah, no, that's fair. Charlie, have you ever noticed that?
Yeah, I've got to say, like, as much as the animations are great at filling in the gaps, what I would give to have it found somewhere like Nigeria, like they did with 2013 releases, I'd rather that than an animation. But yeah, it's still good. But yeah, I am kind of waiting for the last couple of episodes to be normal rather than animated.
Yeah, exactly. No, I certainly get that. And so through the end of 2013, we got the 10th Planet, which got its final episode animated, which was released in October of that year. And clearly it was quite a significant and important episode to be animated because, it's the final episode of William Hartnell's Doctor. As much as we have the regeneration sequence, we didn't have any of the rest of the story existing. So I think it was quite important and exciting to be able to have that finally animated. And I haven't watched it in a while, I have to confess, but I do remember it being a pretty solid, decent animation. I think naturally there's a little bit of that. You've had 3 episodes of the story, really enjoying it, all existing, brilliant, love it. It's the final episode, Sidemen for the first time, just classic. And then with plunge into animation, I think naturally that's always going to be challenging because you've just enjoyed all this existing stuff so much. But I do feel like the animation itself did work quite effectively in this story, and I think that sort of the setting and the period kind of quite suited the animated style, I thought.
Yeah, I think the style for it is very like distinctive. When I first saw the story, I thought it looks a bit like childish and cartoonish. But the second time watching it, I thought it does look quite distinctive and unique in a good sort of way. Like the first the character designs, I think they're quite cool actually, and the Cybermen especially. I think the Mondasian Cybermen, I think they did them justice quite well actually. It was quite a good story as well. Yeah,
I think comparing it to the Reign of Terror, I think it was definitely a definite step up in terms of quality. I think they sorted out the editing problems, and they got rid of I think they did get rid of the whole 3D animation in terms of characters turning their heads, so it's strictly 2D. And I absolutely agree, Charlie. I think it worked really effectively, and sort of the style they sort of went for was definitely much more refined than it was in, say, the Reign of Terror.
Yeah, exactly. I think the 10th Planet was a much stronger one, and I think alongside that, the Moon Base as well was probably one of the best of the first bunch they did of animations. I think that particularly the Cybermen were really well animated in that story, and I think it was episodes 1 and 3, I believe, that were animated. So you kind of start the story with animation, and by the end of it, you're back to existing episodes, which I think can work quite well that in from that aspect. And it's a reasonably entertaining story, even if it's kind of fairly classic Patrick Troughton Doctor Who based under siege story, shall we call it. But that's not to mean that it's bad by any means, but I do think the animation really does work quite effectively in that story in particular.
Yeah, definitely. And I have, of all the animations that Planet 55 did, this is definitely the best one that they've done. And I think you could clearly see from the Reign of Terror all the way through to the Moon Base that they were clearly learning lessons in the past about what worked, what didn't work. And I feel like it sort of all came to ahead with the Moon Base, where they did finally sort out the animations, the designs, the camera shots and everything. I just felt like I thought they did a fairly good job of sort of bringing that sort of story to life, really.
Yeah, exactly. I think. Have you ever seen the Moon Base, Charlie? Ever had a chance to check out those animations?
Yes, I have actually. I've had the Moon Base for quite a while now, actually, and yeah, I think it's quite good. I'd say it's one of the weaker Patrick Trevor and Cyberman stories. I think there's definitely better ones. So like I've seen the Wheel in Space reconstruction. I'd say that's probably going to be my favorite when it's animated. But yeah, I think the Moon Base is still quite a fairly good story. Like, you know, a 7-8 out of 10.
Yeah,
I do quite like the animation, and I think they actually kind of hit the nail on the head with the animation style. And I think it was quite a shame that they took a 2-year gap before Power of the Daleks. But yeah.
Yeah, indeed. This is where we get another sort of odd, interesting gap in animation for Doctor Who, because it seemed like things were in full swing. You've had 4 animations in a year. They'd already commissioned, as far as we know, and had started initial work on the Underwater Menace, animating those 2 missing episodes as well, episodes 1 and 4 of that story, before it all kind of went wrong when there was it was essentially because of the death of the DVD range of Doctor Who. Like, it stopped becoming financially viable. Dan Hall who was the sort of head of everything Doctor Who DVD range. He kind of was looking to move on, and things, I think, just at the BBC kind of fell apart a little bit from that perspective. And so the money didn't quite turn up there, I think, to be able to create the Underwater Menace animation. And so having sort of read up and researched on it, there kind of was initial planning done on the animation, and I think a few kind of maybe character designs were drawn and things like that, but there wasn't like there was ever actually any animation footage created that could have ever been released, even as like an example or something. Like, it simply never got that far. And so it meant that the Underwater Menace sat on the shelf for about a year, I think. And there was I remember there was a petition, wasn't there? I was like, release the fish people or something like that. Because people were desperate for this story to get released, because they just we knew they'd film special features for it. There's a great documentary on there, actually. The documentary for it's really good on the DVD release. And we all knew that, but because the animation wasn't happening, it seemed they just put it on the shelf and left it for dead. Ultimately, with this petition and, you know, fans really pushing for it, it did eventually get released in, I think, late 2015. But it looked like that was simply animated Doctor Who was done. It was no longer financially viable. At the time, we didn't really see a future for Doctor Who on Blu-ray. Classic Who on Blu-ray didn't really look like it was going to be a thing. It looked like, you know, we've had a great 15 years of releasing classic Doctor Who. There we go, that's it, time to move on. But then suddenly we got kind of out of the blue. I remember it was all leaked, wasn't it, on one of the, I think it was the BBC Store website or something, somewhere online. It was leaked the night before, that the Power of the Daleks, all 6 episodes, were going to get animated and released on the 50th anniversary of the story itself. Airing back in 1966. And so I just remember this being so hugely unexpected at the time. Like, there had been no rumours about animated Doctor Who that I could remember from the time, having been very plugged into all that back then. And yet suddenly here we are, staring down the barrel of 6 episodes of Doctor Who being animated and released all at once for us to enjoy in 2016. I mean, do you guys remember the kind of, you know, the hype around that at the time when it was announced?
Yeah, I definitely remember that. And of course, having grew up listening to the audio of Power of the Daleks, I was very interested to see what it would look like in animation. So when the news dropped that it was going to get fully animated, I was really excited just to see what they were going to be doing with it.
Yeah, I remember this was about the time I was first like watching New Who. That was around the time I first like became a Whovian.
Yeah.
So I wasn't really aware around the whole legacy of like, you know, the previous animated stories. The fact that they you know, ditched some of classic Who's stories from the archives in the 60s. I wasn't really aware of all of that. So I was just kind of oblivious to it, and then I found out all about all of this, and I was quite excited. And I still haven't got it, but yeah, I'm hoping to soon, and it looks quite good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this kind of release was a landmark, really, for the animated Doctor Who range, because it signaled a new way to do animations for Doctor Who that would work, that would be cost effective, that would actually get released. Of course, this was made by BBC Studios, what was BBC Worldwide, now BBC Studios, the sort of commercial arm of the BBC, and they did it as a co-production with BBC America, which meant basically that the American side of the BBC were putting in some money, which meant they could happen, and then they'd get a TV release in America, sort of before, I think, them being released on DVD and Blu-ray over there as well. And so it's really set us up in, and seeing that actually it was possible to animate a whole missing story as well, which in the past had looked impossible. Like, you could squeeze in 2 episodes, maybe 3, but the idea of animating 6 episodes from scratch with no existing ones, and to do a story as significant and as important as The Power of the Daleks, I think was a massive moment for the classic range of Blu-ray and DVD and animation. And so, yeah, it was a really, really exciting moment. Ultimately, of course, we got that release on the 21st of November 2016 to mark the 50th anniversary of the episode airing. And I think it's fair to say that it was definitely a good first attempt at a big, full-on 2.5-hour story. Like, it's certainly, the animation is pretty solid. Having watched both the 2016 version and the 2020 version when it came out last year, it's fair to say that the 2016 version was a bit rough around the edges. Like, they didn't have enough time to do it. I think it was all thrown animated together in about 4 or 5 months, which is ridiculous. And now they spend about 12 months on animations. So it was a bit too much. I think they almost realized this would be a good idea too close to the date they wanted to release it, which was this 50th anniversary coinciding with it. Whereas if they thought of this a year earlier, they might have actually been able to do it sort of a bit more properly. So it's brilliant. I think it's brilliant personally. I think that it's a story you can really, because it's all 6 are animated, you can very much just sit down and enjoy it as an animated Doctor Who story. It doesn't have to be that jumping, cutting between. It's just animated Doctor Who. And as much as it's rough around the edges, I think that the Daleks look fantastic in these stories. I think they really, really Daleks just lend themselves to animation. And I just think it's a fantastic story as well, which really, really helps, of course, making it popular animation form as well. So, Ryan, you said you've seen the story. What did you think of the initial animation of this?
With the initial animation, I thought I was fairly satisfied with the initial animation, even though I was kind of disappointed with the sort of the awkward stiffness of some of the character animations and some of the shots, and which were definitely sorted out by the 2020 version. But with the 2016 version, I thought it was definitely a solid attempt, but I did feel like there was some little room for improvement, which thankfully we did get in 2020.
Exactly, yeah. It was the case that Charles Norton, who was one of the main guys behind that release happening back in 2016, he kind of acknowledged and said to the BBC, look, we did this 3 or 4 years ago, but it wasn't really finished. It wasn't really quite what we wanted to do, what we were happy with. But then they got the opportunity, of course, to improve it, do it properly, do it how they wanted it. And I do think it's a notable improvement on the 2016 version. And I'd certainly recommend it for anybody who hasn't got either of them yet. Get the 2021. I would always suggest that you'd go for that over the 2016 one. And that, but also worth mentioning alongside that is the interesting point that Power of the Daleks also was the start of animating Doctor Who in colour, which is an interesting idea. I mean, it's certainly worth noting that with Power of the Daleks, it was not meant to be colour. And BBC America basically said, we want a colour version to put on TV. And so after the animation had done completely, they got someone else to slap some colour over it, basically. Which is why the colour version doesn't look very good on Power of the Daleks. In my opinion, I don't think it looks that great. It's not as well incorporated and doesn't sort of utilise the opportunity of colour as much as some of the later animations do. I don't know, Ryan, have you ever seen the colour version of Power of the Daleks? Did you ever sit down and watch that?
I got through 5 minutes of it and then I just gave up.
Yeah.
Because it, as you said, it definitely looks like someone just slapped colour over it, and it just didn't appeal to me at all, really. Yeah. So yeah, and I still haven't, and that was only a few years ago, and I still haven't gone back to check it out because I just know that if I watched all the way through, I was not going to really enjoy it as much as the black and white version, frankly.
Yeah, I don't think I'm ever gonna get around to what. Now I've got the new updated version as well. I don't think I'm ever actually gonna go back and watch the colour version. I feel like I did watch it once and it wasn't great, and so I don't think I'm gonna bother with that again in the future, really. So yeah, that kind of got us all started again with the animation range, and since then, in many ways, they've been coming thick and fast. We got the slightly surprising, I guess, maybe a little bit, but a great opportunity in releasing Shalka, finally finishing Shalka. Now we won't talk about Shalka too much because we are going to do a special episode in the future all about the many versions of Shalka. So we'll just say they made it, they animated it in color. I think it's quite good. Do you guys think the animation's pretty good for Shalka?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I just thought it was a great way of sort of plugging in the gaps and finally completing that lost classic that everyone wanted to see. And frankly,
yeah, Charlie, you enjoy Sharda, the animated version?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Ryan. I think the animation of Sharda is great, and it just sort of finalized all of the Sharda reconstructions, books, Big Finish, everything we've had with Sharda. It just sort of compiled it into one actual Sharda story. It's really good.
Exactly. Yeah, as I say, we won't say too much more about Sharda now because we're going to do a special episode focused purely on the, I don't know, hundreds of releases of Sharda in different forms for the future. So we had that in 2017, in late 2017. Then we didn't actually get an animated release in 2018, but they were still working on them, cracking away. And so in March 2019, we got the release of the Macra Terror, which I think is another story, like we talked about earlier with the Reign of Terror, where it maybe wasn't at the top of anybody's list, or you wouldn't really kind of expect it to get animated in some ways because it just doesn't have a big monster like the Daleks or the Cybermen or whatever that you think that's one that's going to sell. But actually, I think the Macra Terror has definitely been one of the strongest animated releases we've had. I think the animation worked really, really effectively. It was one that doesn't have existing episodes again, and they went for a more kind of ambitious animation style, I think it's fair to say. They kind of thought, and I mean, it also created some controversial elements with the drop of the rough and tumble scene, I think it's called, isn't it, with Patrick Troughton in the machine, that has caused many a debate and angry comment on Gallifrey Base and the like. The debate and discussion is ridiculous on that. Like, it's a 2-minute scene. I know it's a shame that it's not there, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over it, where some people I think might. And they just decided, we'll take little audio cuts here to be able to create slightly different shots and just fit things a bit better. And I think that their sort of style and look of that animation is probably one of my favorites. I don't know what you guys think about it. What Charlie, have you? I'm guessing you've seen it. What do you think about the Macra Terror?
Honestly, it's my favorite Patrick Troughton story ever.
Wow.
I love it. I think it's up there with Tomb of the Cybermen, Enemy of the World, Web of Fear, all those stories. I love it. I think the animation, how they managed to, because obviously it's 2D animation, but they made it look like it was 3D animation. And honestly, I can't tell the difference. I didn't even know it was 2D until after I saw the story. It's done really effectively, and I do really enjoy it. I think the general style of it looks great.
I think this rivals the Faceless ones as being my favorite of the animations, and I was quite surprised because the Macra Terror, having listened to it on audio, it wasn't really one that sort of stood out to me as being anything that special. But when I saw it with the animation, it did sort of elevate my feelings on that story. And now I think it's one of the best of the Troughton stories, in my opinion.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the animation just really helps. Things like the Macra, that we know the actual prop that didn't look very good, and it clearly wouldn't have looked that great in the original version. The freedom of the animation to be able to create something so much more threatening and menacing, and then utilizing lighting and coloring and things to be able to create the kind of menace and creepy and scary nature of it in some ways, I think is really, really effective. And of course, it's notable that the Macra Terror was a story that was basically created to be done in color. The animation of this, it was intended to be a color animation. There is a black and white version existing alongside it, but they designed it in mind with color, and that's the version that I actually watched the first time round. And I thought, whereas Power of the Daleks didn't work in color, I think the Macra Terror actually was really, really effective in color as well. I don't know, have you guys seen the color version of this?
Yes, I have seen the color versions, and with the color versions of the Macra Terror, Faceless Ones, Fury from Deep, I do think the color versions of those stories, I always see them as a nice added little bonus to them. Although, if I was given the choice between watching the color versions or the black and white versions, I will always choose the black and white because I feel like those stories were always made and designed for black and white. So I'm always going to choose them regardless. But the color ones are a nice little added bonus for those stories.
Yeah, the more recent stories, the ones that have a color animation option, I watch both, within a few weeks of each other, not just back to back. But I watched both of them, and for this story specifically, not all of them, I did prefer the color version. I think it's better to do the color version first and then desaturate it rather than the other way around.
I think it's a fascinating thing because I know a lot of fans talk about how, as Ryan, you say, because it was made in black and white originally, that the right way to watch it is in black and white, and I don't disagree with that at all. I think that for me, it would probably be the case of like if I was marathoning the show through that era, I'd probably watch them in black and white. But if I was just going to go and pull one off the shelf and watch it on its own, I'd probably watch it in color. just because of the kind of enjoyable aspect of the color, which I think can always add that little something extra to each animation that we get. But yeah, so that was the Macroterra, and so we've only got a couple left now, really. We're right up to date. Last year we got the Faces ones and Fury from the Deep, as you guys have mentioned. The Faces ones is an interesting one because it's the first one they did in this new batch of animations where there's, a couple of episodes existing in the middle. Episodes 1 and 3 existed this story and the rest are missing. But they did animate all 6 episodes to create a full production that you could kind of sit back and watch, and I think was probably what they used to air in BBC America. Like, they wouldn't have slapped the missing episodes in the middle, or the existing ones in the middle. They would have very much gone down the route of showing all 6 animated ones. And I think that in many ways, when I first watched this, I made a mistake, because basically I thought, because they gave these slightly odd viewing options. I know that there's a color widescreen version, and then there's a black and white 4:3 version on the DVD and the Blu-ray. And I made the decision that I want to watch this with the existing episodes, so I'm going to do the black and white cropped version. And I think that actually was a mistake, because the thing is that the animation was made to be a widescreen 16:9 animation, and so the cropping is literally just pulled in either side, and it doesn't really matter if you're losing stuff from either side. They've just gone, oh well, it's 4:3, who cares? And so I think it does actually kind of, become a negative to the animation, because you're losing that much of the picture without that being kind of thought in mind in creating that version. So yeah, I kind of made a mistake there, basically. And what I should have done was just either watch all 6 episodes of the color version, the widescreen version, or have just, done the existing episodes, but with the color ones in there as well. So yeah, that was my mistake. I think the animation's good, but I think that was my mistake there. What about you guys? Charlie, what do you think about this animation?
This is probably the one I'm most neutral on. Like, the animation style, I don't love it, but I don't hate it. I think it's just all right. As for the story, I do really enjoy it. I think it's a classic Patrick Troughton story. Not my absolute favorite. I prefer Macroterra and Fury from the Deep, but I do really enjoy it, and the animation style, while not the best, is still quite good.
The Faceless ones has always been a bit special to me, because this came out around the same time as my birthday. And it's also weird looking back, because by the time this came out, the rest of the world was normal back then compared to everything that's happened right now.
Exactly. It was a week before the UK lockdown was announced. A week before.
Yeah.
So, yes.
So watching it wasn't... before I say the viewing order, I'll say in terms of the story, in a way, it's how I felt about Macroterra, where when I would listen to it on audio originally, I was sort of a bit neutral on it, but when I watched it with the animations, it did greatly improve the story, in my opinion. I just think when you have the visuals, it does sort of really help. And it's interesting, when I first started watching this, I did a thing of watching the original existing episode first, and then watching the same one, the animation one, afterwards. So I watched both versions of part 1 and part
3.
Was it 3 or 4? Yeah, part 3. Both versions at the same time as on my first viewing. So it was definitely interesting. I do agree the sort of cropping the image out of side is a little bit of a weird choice, but after a while I sort of got used to it. I sort of become accustomed to it. Although when you have the full image, the widescreen image in the color version, you do start to notice more of the detail that I sort of wish they did include in the black and white cropped animation version.
Yeah, exactly. It's it was an interesting decision, and I think that maybe I just made that mistake. I think in future I'd probably would watch the 6 episodes animated, but it also feels like if there's existing episodes there, you should watch them. So as you sort of went with Ryan, you watching both. I think that's kind of quite a good way to do it, actually. Because it just feels like you can't miss out on actual episodes. As much as I'm just kind of a bit nonplussed about the animated ones that are already existing. I understand why they do it, but it's also like I'm always going to choose an existing episode over an animated one. So I guess that's just the way that they decide to do that. And then so our final animation we've had so far in the range is Fury from the Deep, which was released in September of last year and was significantly affected by COVID in terms of getting it released, because I think they first announced it about a year or so before that, and it took them a while obviously to actually get it released. I think it was COVID delayed things, as it did with many different things last year. And so I think it was quite a strong animation. There's some interesting choices in terms of this one that feels a bit like the Reign of Terror, but not quite as bad in terms of it being very stylistically different to what the original would have looked like. Sort of the massive rooms and things and sets and stuff that are portrayed in there that would have been nonsense and impossible back in the 60s, and things like that. It's more so in that aspect, I think, than in sort of the camera and the directing itself necessarily. But I do still think I do remember thoroughly enjoying it, and much more than when I'd previously watched the loose cannon reconstruction of it, and I found it very hard to engage. Whereas watching this animation, I actually found it a very, very enjoyable story. So Ryan, what did you think of Fury from the Deep on first viewing?
Well, Fury of the Deep is even listening to it originally on audio, it actually was one of my favourite Troughton stories, and I was very, like Power of the Daleks, I was very curious to see how the animation would look. And I think for the most part, the animation succeeds, even though I do feel like the arms were weirdly out of proportion at times.
Yes.
I feel like I wish they had a bit more time to sort of work out how to animate the arms and the hands better so they don't look massive in certain shots. But on the whole, I did feel like they did a good job of fully realizing that story and getting that sort of that creepy, moody atmosphere that I really wanted to see in that story. And watching both versions, the black and white version does make it more creepier, which is exactly what I wanted from that story. But the colour one still works effectively with sort of the dark greys and greens that were sort of going on.
Yeah, I think it's a very good story. Again, I don't think there's a single Troughton story I don't like. Yeah, I think they're all really good. In terms of the characters, I think the characters do look a bit weird, like very janky and not animated to perfection. But I think it's strange because the set design's really good. It's like the animated equivalent of very like obvious CSO. They don't seem to interact together very well, and it looks like two separate animations just slapped over each other.
No, I definitely get that feeling from it. That it probably wasn't perfect, but I guess this is the point to come to as we come towards the end here. I don't think there is a singular perfect animation of Doctor Who so far. I mean, based on all the ones that we've had that you've seen so far, what if you could pick one that you would say is your favourite, or the one you think that worked most effectively as an animation? What do you think? So kind of almost not thinking so much about the kind of actual story and whether you love the story, more about the animation itself. What do you think is your favourites?
Mine would be sort of a tie between the Macra Terror and the Faceless Ones, because I just really like that animation style that both of them had. I feel like it nailed the characters' likeness, the sets, and the camera angles, and how they choose to edit things. I feel like the animations for both those stories, I feel like, worked the most effectively for me personally.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I do love both of those, but if I had to pick one favorite, it would have to be Macra Terror. I absolutely love the animation. I think it's brilliant. I think just everything about it works so well, and the 2D to 3D animation sort of, it kind of pretends to be 3D. I think that's really effective. And in general, I think it's just really great, both animation-wise and story-wise.
Yeah, no, I'm going to come in and agree that actually the Macra Terror probably is my favourite animation as well. As much as I maybe don't think as much of the story as you, Charlie, I do think that as an animated piece, it's a really, really strong one. It strikes that most effective balance between sort of representing 60s Doctor Who, but also utilising the animation format to be able to do something that's more visually entertaining and interesting to watch. It really strikes that right balance, I think, that's so effective. And probably for me, the one other left field one that I do really like, I can't deny I still really like the original one, The Invasion. I think the 2 episodes they animated there of The Invasion are still to this day very effective and stand up really, really well, whereas some of the other animated ones at points maybe don't look that great. I think The Invasion, fitting into that story, just actually flows really, really nicely. And of course, I'd love the sort of miscasts to be returned, but probably The Invasion is one of those ones that I'm least worried about getting those couple of episodes back, because we've got 6 episodes and we've got 2 great animated episodes as well. That's my 2 little picks there. But of course, the final thing we should probably talk briefly about, time's getting on, but we'll have a quick little chat about what's the future for the animation range, animated Doctor Who. But of course, last year was a significant moment once they announced Fury from the Deep, because it revealed for the first time that there could be 2 animation teams working on 2 separate Doctor Who animations at the same time, whereas previously BBC Studios had worked their way way through. They'd done Power of the Daleks, finished that, then started Shada and finished that, then did the Macroterra and finished that, and then started the Faceless ones. But alongside that, they then also introduced Fury from the Deep, made by Big Finish Creative, which was Planet 55, who did all those ones around 2013, now called Big Finish Creative, and they have been able to take on and do Fury from the Deep alongside that, which suggests that going forwards, we can have two different animation teams at least working on animations, which I think is great news and suggests that the speed and the rate of animated Doctor Who could increase at some point in the future, even if not just yet because of COVID, among other things, I imagine, slowing things down. We of course currently have Web of Fear. The Web of Fear is being animated. The missing episode of that, episode 3, that for whatever reason was lost on the way back to the UK from Nigeria back in 2011 when Philip Morris discovered those. Lots of stories about that, but I think the impression is it's not going to turn up anytime soon. So let's just animate it, get that one finished, boshed off, then it's kind of done. And it's being done by a studio called, well, in BBC Studios are kind of in producing it, but the animation's being done by a company called Shapeshifter Studios, which I've never heard of. I've Googled them and I can't really find out anything about them. So if anybody is listening to this and knows anything about it, please get in touch, either at KerVAM Pod on Twitter or comment on the YouTube video or whatever. If you work for Shapeshifter Studios, please hit me up and we'll come and interview you. Or if you just know who they are, please tell me, because I can't find a singular piece of information about them as a company online at all. So apart from some sort of dissolved company from 5 years ago that was called Shapeshifter Studios and went bust 3 years ago. So who knows? But they are animating that, and that's confirmed for 2021 at some point. Are you guys looking forward to finally having that story completed with the last episode being animated?
Well, I will say is I love the Web of Fear. I think it's one of the best Troughton stories. After watching the preview trailer animation that they released a few months ago and seeing how Troughton's moving in animation, I do have some concerns.
Yeah, I know. I know what you mean.
It's a bit rough in terms of the way he's sort of moving and the facial animations, and the fact that going looks like mostly 3D animation. It's making me a bit nervous, but I'm just hoping they just have enough time and enough resources to kind of make sure it's as good as possible. I'm hoping, fingers crossed.
Exactly. Charlie, are you looking forward to this? I've got to share the similar concerns.
Yeah, looking at it, it does look a bit strange. It might just be, a one-off scene that, is probably the worst of the lot. But yeah, I'm still quite, I've refrained from getting the 2013 edition because I know we're going to get a special edition episode 3 animated so soon. But yeah, I do agree, Ryan. I am a bit worried it'll be a significant step down. Yeah, I don't really know.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see on that. I can't say I was convinced by the little trailer clip they did, sort of animating what was an audio trailer, I think, from the time or something like that. But you never know; they might do a better job with the actual thing. And either way, it's only one episode animated, so there'll still be lots of existing episodes to enjoy, sort of surrounding it, which will probably make it a little bit easier as well. We don't know when it's being released this year, just at some point. It's kind of odd. They announced it on Doctor Who Day last year, 23rd November, of course, and we're now, 6-7 months on from that, and we've heard not a single peep about it since then. So I'm sure it's still happening, just who knows when, but it certainly is implied that it's going to be this year, so maybe at some point. And of course, we've got 3 stories that are currently being rumoured for animation. 2 very long-running rumours from, I believe, August or September of last year, which was Evil of the Daleks and the Abominable Snowmen. Of course, a couple of Second Doctor stories where they both have a singular episode that exists and 6 missing episodes in a 7-part story. So, all the evidence suggests that these are probably being worked on at the moment, but don't know, not been announced. Who knows when they'll be released? You'd probably guess at this stage it's going to be next year at the earliest. Would you guys look forward to either of these stories being animated? I mean, what's your kind of preferred one if you could get one of these first, either the Daleks or the Abominable Snowmen? Which would be your number one choice? Charlie, what do you think? What would be your first pick?
My go-to would be Evil of the Daleks.
Yeah.
I can see it being a great story, to be honest. Victoria's introduction, and yeah, I just think it looks like such a great story. I'm hoping to get the Target novelization sometime soon, and it just looks really good, to be honest. That's all I really have to say.
Yeah, no, exactly. Ryan, what about you? Which one would you like to see first?
Well, I love both stories. I think both are really strong stories for the Troughton era, but I absolutely agree with Charlie. I would choose Evil of the Daleks because I grew up listening to the audio of that, and I would just remember being so encapsulated by the story and seeing how the Doctor getting and Jamie getting trapped in the period that they're in, and then all of a sudden towards the end, the action suddenly moves to Skaro and seeing the Emperor. It's such an amazing story. So that's probably the one I would definitely like to see animated first.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with either. I mean, I think I'm just looking forward to more animated Doctor Who to come. Albeit, as we say, is probably going to be next year, given that Web of Fear still hasn't come and we're getting towards May, June time. I'd be implied to say, sort of suggest it'll be next year, but I don't know, we'll see. And I think that it's just great that they're continuing to, well, obviously this is all rumours, but they're continuing to crack on with animations. And it's always that interesting thing of what they're going to do with the collection Blu-rays once we get to these seasons that have animated or sort of missing episodes in it. Will they wait for animations? Will they just go for it? They've kind of implied they won't wait for the animation range because who knows how long it's going to take to animate most of these stories. But I don't know, we'll have to see with that. And of course, the one other rumour doing the rounds in the last couple of days was that Galaxy 4 is going to be animated. The first Hartnell animation since 2013, of course, with 10th Planet and Reign of Terror coming that year. I don't think Galaxy 4 would have been my first choice for an animation. I think there's one episode existing and then like a 6-minute segment from another episode, but the rest of it is missing. Maybe it's because it's a fairly simple story to animate, which it probably is, but I don't think that anybody's ever thought, wow, I'd love to get a Galaxy 4 animation. Have you guys?
No, that was definitely not the first choice I would have thought that they would pick for in terms of animation. I mean, having listened to the audio and watching that once firing episode of the clip, it didn't really stood out to me. I remember being fine, but I don't think it really stood out to me that much. So I was a bit shocked when it was sort of rumored that was going to get the animation treatment instead of something like, I don't know, the Daleks Master Plan or something like that.
Yeah. I remember it was yesterday I looked on my YouTube subscription videos list and I found someone saying about Galaxy 4 might be animated. I thought, really? Galaxy 4? I remember being so surprised when I first saw that. And yeah, it does confuse me a bit why they're doing a Hartnell story rather than a Troughton story, since their aim does seem to be to complete the Troughton era. But
yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because we've seen them do so many Troughton stories recently. I think is it season 4 or 5, season 5, isn't it? That's nearly complete now in animation. I think it's just the Wheel in Space pretty much that needs to be done. And then we're nigh on there from that point of view. So maybe that's why they're starting to look back towards the Hartnell era now, because at some point they need to do a few more Hartnells, but I think they've always looked at it as the Hartnell era is a more difficult sell to the public, that the sort of stories and just the character is slightly less popular to an general audience than some of the Troughton stories. But I just don't see how Galaxy 4 is going to be an easy sell. Like, the Chumberleys, woohoo, let's sell them for, slap them on the front cover with an animated William Hartnell, and that's going to get loads of people buying it. I mean, I'm sure we all will because we're crazy Doctor Who fans, but I imagine that the general audience might not pick up on it so much. But, well, we'll have to wait and see how that all plays out in the future. And so probably the final thing to say is, ignoring the rumours, ignoring whatever, if you guys could pick one story that is the next to be animated, what would it be?
I would go for the Daleks Master Plan because I think that's one of the very best of the William Hartnell era. I think it's such a grand, epic Dalek story, and Mavic Chen is such a great villain opposite the Daleks, and I just love that sort of big journey across the whole of time and space, and the fact that there's like real consequences along the way, like the Doctor loses 2 companions in that story, and it's such a real weight to it that I would love to see that animated one day.
If I had to choose one to be animated, bit of a strange one, but Marco Polo. I think that'd be really entertaining to see. I've seen the reconstructions on, I believe it was the Edge of Destruction DVD actually, and it looks like a really great story. I think it especially in colour, it seems to be very vibrant and interesting regarding that aspect. And it just seems like a really cool historical story that I'd love to see animated.
Yeah, you've actually stolen my suggestion there. I was going to say Marco Polo. I think that I think, as you mentioned as well, in particular, the colour aspect of it, I think Marco Polo is a story that would work brilliantly as a colour animated story. just the sort of depth of settings that we get throughout that story. Like every episode, you're now on sort of that long journey they go on and go into so many different places. And I think that being able to create those in animated form would be such a great opportunity, and to do it in color as well. I think would add a lot to the story as well. So I feel like that also would probably be one of the easiest sells for a kind of classic Hartnell historical story, because I feel like a lot of people are at least aware of Marco Polo. It's always thought of as this lost classic, where some of the other ones, like I don't know, the Smugglers or the Highlanders or whatever, I know that's a Troughton story, but they're maybe rather less kind of well thought of, and as something that people really might want to watch and to enjoy in the future. I think the only other one I'd probably mention is The Wheel in Space. I'd also it's been rumored for years, and they did briefly animate sort of an 8-minute kind of 10-minute cut down of the first episode a couple of years ago to be shown at the Missing Believe Wiped, which is sort of a missing TV, lost TV convention, I guess, at the BFI, the British Film Institute. And for whatever reason, they decided to do that, but haven't ever actually looked at doing the whole story. I don't really quite understand why they did this 10-minute segment and nothing else, but that's what they did. And that probably for me would be one that I'm hopeful of a release in the future. And I think given the fact it's got Sidemen in it, it seems quite likely they will do that at some point down the line as well, because it's just simply an easy sell from that point of view as well. So, well, there we go. That is animated Doctor Who. What are your guys' final thoughts? Do you fundamentally enjoy animated Doctor Who? Do you think it's a great way? Do you think it's a good way to kind of recreate and give an opportunity to watch lost episodes? Do you guys think it really works for Doctor Who?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think the animations are just such a good way of before then we just thought we'd have to wait so many so many years for them to just hopefully find all of these reels of the footage, and I just think it's a great way to fill in the gaps and still stay true to the source material.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think in terms of plugging in the gaps and recreating those lost classics, I think animation is definitely the best way of doing that. Obviously, there's some better than others, but when they work really effectively. And I really hope they continue doing this in the future.
Yeah, exactly. I certainly think there's a lot more to come from the animated Doctor Who range. I think that they've added they shed a new light on some of these stories. Like everybody kind of thought nothing of the Macra Terror, and then it was released, and suddenly people were like, "Wow, this story is actually really good. We're really enjoying this." So I think that it's just. And maybe, you never know, we might get that with Galaxy 4 if we're lucky. We might all suddenly realise it's a lost classic. And it's kind of the same that happens when the episodes themselves get returned as well, like we saw with the Enemy of the World back in 2013. Everybody kind of thought nothing of that because the third episode isn't really that great on its own. But in reality, it's now a popular story, and I love it personally as well. So I'm really think that it's going to be a great look forward to the animation range of the future. So that brings us towards the end of this podcast. I realize we've gone on for a while this week. So I'll just quickly, some of what I always do towards the end of the pod is just a quick little mention of what's coming up. So in 3 weeks time or so, the 31st of May, there's the season 12 and season 19 Blu-ray re-releases. So if you missed out on either of those seasons first time rounds, they are being released on the 31st of May this year. I think you can still pre-order them, or maybe they've gone out of sale. I'm not quite sure. I think they're still around, still available. And in our next podcast in 3 weeks or so time, we will do a little focus on those two releases in particular and have a discussion about those seasons and what sort of the Blu-rays brought to them, and just basically reasons whether it's actually worth buying those releases or not. Are you actually going to get many more special features and interesting aspects to them? So do join us next time for a good discussion on that as well. Of course, we've also got season 24 that's coming up at some point in the future this year, hopefully June or July time. I know that in mid-June they're doing one of these BFI screenings of Delta and the Bannerman, where before each Blu-ray release they go and show one of the stories in the cinema in London, which is great. I've never managed to get to one myself. I'd really like to in the future. I don't know if either of you ever managed to get down to one of those.
Unfortunately, no. I mean, I've been to sort of official big conventions at like the Excel in London, but in terms of the BFI screenings, unfortunately, no. I would love to attend one of those screenings one day. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
Yes, definitely in the future. It would be nice to. What about you, Charlie? Ever had a chance?
Unfortunately, just like Ryan, I haven't, but I'm hoping to in the future. They sound really good, and it'd just be nice to see a Doctor Who story with loads of other Whovians,
Yeah, exactly. I think, and it always gives an indication as well, of course, of when they're going to be released, because we don't have a release date for season 24. But I would guess maybe June, maybe July, around that time. And as we mentioned earlier, the Web of Fear is also coming at some point this year. But apart from that, it's fairly quiet with Doctor Who releases at the moment. Well, I'm sure we'll get another Blu-ray collection release announced at some point. Hopefully, a new animation at some point as well. And when we get around to Series 13, there'll also be that to come in the future as well. So that's pretty much it for this podcast. Have you guys enjoyed having a good chat about animations? It's always an interesting topic, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely been interesting going back and just seeing just how the animations has evolved over time. It's been really fascinating, definitely.
Yeah, I agree. It's been a really fun chat. I've really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Yeah, it's been definitely really, really good. And next, as I mentioned, in the next podcast, we're going to have a focus, particularly on season 12 and season 19, but also just have a quick look at the Blu-ray collection range so far as a whole. Look at the stories, look at the features they did for them, and also what that suggests about the future of the range and what features you might get in future releases as well. So if you're a fan of the collection range, which I'm sure most people listening are, and have probably got all of them, quite frankly, but certainly it's going to be an episode to check out in the future in 3 weeks' time when we do that one. So apart from that, please, if you want to find out more about the podcast, go check us out on Twitter at KerVAM Pod, where you can follow us there for the latest info on upcoming podcasts and all that. Or if you're following the videos on YouTube as well, please do drop a like or a comment as well as to if you're enjoying it or any thoughts on it, any thoughts on your favourite animations as well. We'd love to hear from you on that. I'm still trying to organise getting these on all the podcast sites. It's getting there. I know it's on Acast so far, on Google Podcasts as well. I think I just need to get Spotify and Apple Podcasts sorted, and then hopefully you can go pretty much to any of your podcast sites and be able to enjoy the pod. But apart from that, hope you enjoyed the second episode of KerVAM, and we'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.